To je bilo negdje u 6. razredu osnovne škole.
I was probably in 6th grade of elementary school when Domenik Ramaj, our local priest, was sentenced. A large detachment of policemen came and they bound him just like Jesus and led him away to jail. They falsely accused him of supposedly having incited people to assassinate the Communist Party secretary. He looked at me with an expression on his face that said, "I'm leaving. Will I come back? I don't know. And who will take my place?" He was sentenced to 14 years hard labor. He looked on just like Jesus. I looked on and knelt, and as they led him away like a common criminal, surrounded by soldiers and policemen, I thought to myself, "Jesus, I desire to be your priest, if you will have me."
Isuse, ako ti mene prihvaćaš, ja želim biti tvoj svećenik. Ja sam Don Lush Gjergji.
I'm Father Lush Gjergji. I was born in Stubla on the 21st of March 1949. It's a mountainous area known as the Karadak region.
Karadački dio ili Skopska Crna Gora.
Although he belongs to a minority church in Kosovo, this Catholic priest has a reputation of importance. He is greatly respected both by the Muslim majority and by Catholics. People flock to him on the street and in church wanting to greet him and seek his advice. He encourages, advises, and attends to one and all in equal measure. Behind everything he does is an interior drive to honor the example of his forefathers.
Jedan veliki izazov sa mnogo poteškoća.
The idea that challenges me, but which brings hardship too, and great satisfaction with it, is to be a successor worthy of our forefathers. The bishops, priests, and religious who are the only light in the centuries of darkness. They left an indelible mark on the culture, civilization, identity, and language of the Albanian people. That was a challenge to me, whether I would be able to contribute, to write something in the service both to God and to my people and towards mankind without any digression on the creed, nation or culture, the way that Mother Teresa did. I'm very proud of that. Every day that pride, that zeal and that genuine joy is amplified in me.
I svaki dan taj ponos I taj zanos I to oduševljenje raste u meni.
This strong desire to serve God in Kosovo was vital, especially upon his return from studies in Rome. Having successfully defended his doctoral thesis, Father Lush returned to a depleted and spent local church.
Normalno je dolazeći iz Rima bila je jedna bijeda.
Coming from Rome, of course, the misery of Kosovo struck me. We were lacking priests. They were all elderly and exhausted from communist imprisonment. That new blood, the 3 new priests, there were 2 others before me in 1972, delighted people and inspired many new vocations. That's when the rebirth of our church began and of the whole diocese, which up to then was hardly known. Few people knew of the existence of these Albanians who claimed to be Catholics.
Da postoji neki Albanci koji kažu da su katolici.
That anonymity was caused by over 300 years of forced Islamization. To survive, Catholics were obliged to seek refuge here, in the rugged hillsides on the outskirts of Kravasaria. It was there, living in misery and poverty, that the Kosovan Albanians protected the seed of faith in their families up to the present day. It is from one such family that Father Lush Gjergji descends. His brother Noé, also a priest, still remembers their childhood together.
He was 3 and I was 6 when our father died. My mother fed us and schooled us, along with my older brother and the other members of the family who supported us in everything. When the 3 of us, 2 brothers and another cousin, were ordained and held our first Mass, that was really something, not just for ourselves, but for the parish and the diocese.
On the long winter nights, their mother would tell them stories about their ancestors. One memory in particular was influential in the life decision of the 2 Gjergji brothers. In the 19th century, 17 chiefs of the Albanian Catholic villages of Varnoakolo, Binac, Terezia, Stubla, together with their priest, Father Ante Maroevic, came to the local Begovian center in Gnilane, looking for permission to publicly state their Catholic identity. Bey Dinolia, the local Turkish administrator, imprisoned them together with their parish priest, shackling them in chains weighing 50 kilos, and sent them on foot to the Turkish governor in Pristina, Yadar Pasha.
Many of them died along the way and their bodies were thrown to the dogs. They didn't even permit them a burial. Those who by some miracle survived the march were taken out to sea to be tortured and to utterly break them.
Wishing to make an example of them to all, Yadar Pasha too tortured them and marched them through Thessaloniki all the way to Anatolia, together with the members of their family. Many of those still remaining didn't survive the journey. Once there, the Ottoman authorities placed them in the swamplands of Mahalic, where those few Catholics who had survived began to die of malaria. On hearing of this, European ambassadors exerted pressure on the Sultan, and in the end the Turkish authorities allowed the last 79 remaining survivors to return to their homeland.
We are descendants of those Catholic Albanians. There are about 10,000 of us today. They are the main source of our vocations, priests and religious. From that region comes our bishop, Monsignor Don Gjergji, and most of our clerics, priests and religious. The martyrs are the seeds of the new Christians, in our case of new priests, nuns and religious vocations.
Dr. Yahya Drancholi, professor of history at the University of Pristina, sees Father Lush not just as a man of faith, but also a great humanist. They have cooperated on many projects, and from this a mutual respect and friendship has arisen.
Don Lush je jedan pravi primer tolerancije.
Father Lush is a true example of tolerance. He is a human being with a superior intelligence. He is a man who works for this people regardless of what denomination they belong to, whether it be Orthodox, Muslim or Catholic.
Katoličke vere. Znači, imamo primer jednog apostola.
He is an example, a true apostle, like St. Paul, who is known as an apostle of the people, a contemporary apostle. If there is such a thing in these times, I would call Father Lush an apostle of our times.
Dom Lusha nazvao suvremenog apostola.
In the 1970s, Father Lush worked as a secretary for Bishop Nicola Prela. It was a time of false promises when communist authorities, in an effort to separate people from their faith, convinced Kosovans that all was well and that God was not necessary. By the end of the decade, the communist ideals slowly began to wane. It was replaced by the intimidation of the greater Serbian expansion under the cover of socialism and Yugoslavia. In the 1980s, the degree of Serbian intimidation became intolerable. Schooling in the Albanian language was prohibited and universities were closed. The secret police cracked down on anyone who dared to proclaim themselves Albanian, declaring them enemies of the state. In 1989, President Slobodan Milošević finalized this process and stamped out whatever was left of the Albanian identity. Father Lush, together with many other Kosovan Albanians, became actively involved in the battle against the greater Serbian occupation.
Mi smo sada pokupili svu snagu,
So we gathered together all our strength, moral, spiritual, and cultural. In the 90s, we emerged into our springtime with three major movements which were important for us. The first was the battle against the blood feuds. The second was the foundation of the Mother Teresa Society, solidarity between people. And the third was the battle against illiteracy.
borba protiv analfabetizma.
Blood feuds were the result of the canon of lek dukajin, a legal code permitting murder to avenge the blood of a relative, a duty that was passed from father to son. The code, in existence since the 15th century, was practiced mainly in areas where there was little state power. Even up until the beginning of the 19th century, there were still thousands of families caught up in this brutal tradition. It was clear to Father Lush and those helping him that the struggle to eradicate blood feuds would not be easy. Dr. Marian Dema, a professor of life sciences at the University of Pristina, understood the need to break the cycle of violence and publicly forgave the murderers of his two brothers. For him, it was of utmost importance to support the Church in this enterprise.
Sjećam se da Don Lush učestvovao u
I remember Father Lush participating in many of those meetings. We held large talks.
bili su veliki. Znam kada sam
When I forgave the murders of my brothers, I remember Father Mark Sopi sent someone to ask if I wanted the Church to participate in that process. I told him that without the Church, it simply wouldn't work.
Bez crkve to neće se uraditi.
Jer smo išli čak od kuće do kuće.
We went from house to house. At that time, night and day, I covered the whole surface of Kosovo. I was in Uroševac. It was a period in which 15 to 20 days would pass by before I would return home. I had the support of my bishop and the Church, and we managed to convince people that peace, freedom, and democracy wouldn't come unless we defeated evil and hatred and completely eradicated this blood feud. And the people really responded. We spoke heart to heart.
Mi smo govorili od srca k srcu.
Professor Ramiz Kelmedi, a publicist and journalist, says he will remember this time forever.
I'd say with my whole heart that everywhere reconciliation was welcomed. The people greeted us with home specialities, pies, and their traditional cakes. They invited us to lunch and dinner. There was a wonderful feeling, unbelievable. I'd even say theatrical. The atmosphere was full of emotion. The pride of those who were able to forgive murder. Although instead of rejoicing, we were crying. We should have been celebrating, but we cried. Kosovo never cried as much as when it put an end to those blood feuds.
Kosovo nuk ka qajt ma shumë se me rastin e pajtimit gjatëseve.
1. svibnja 90.
On the 1st of May 1990 at Luko near Desani, about 600,000 people came to celebrate the victory of life over death. I remember that for Easter we had 4 huge meetings for reconciliation in predominantly Muslim regions. Most of them didn't even know how to say Happy Easter. They'd say Happy Holiday for you, the one where you say that he rose from the dead, and so on. Anyway, they were all happy at the events. It really was a resurrection for me, the resurrection of my people. One of the most beautiful Easters I ever had. When my people had a victory over themselves, that was God's work. I couldn't believe that people could have that sort of strength, God's strength, to forgive 2, 3 or 4 murders without any conditions.
3, 4, bez ikakvih uvjeta.
Zoti qoftë me ju. Leximi I Ungjillit shajt sipas Markut.
On je pre svega dobar čovek, uvek je
Above all else, he is a good man.
pomaže ljudima,
He is ready to help anyone. He is a man that is honored not only by Catholics. I think he's even more respected by the Muslim people.
muslimanski Albanaca, on je uvek spreman da daje sve što je
He's always ready to give everything of himself for others.
uvek kažem
Father Lush is special for all of our people,
poseban
not just for the Catholic Albanians.
albanski narod. Ne samo
I respect him and honor him.
ja ga poštujem, ja ga volim.
The final chapter of the Kosovan struggle for independence was one of war, pitting the Serbian armed forces and paramilitary police on one hand and the Kosovo Liberation Army on the other. It was mostly civilians who paid the price for this brutal struggle. Father Lush kept the doors of his parish house open to offer hospitality to whoever needed it, regardless of nationality or creed.
Ja sam tada bio u Binču, imao sam od 150...
I was in Binac at the time. I took in between 150 and 300 people. Some of them only had 5 minutes to escape, so they'd jump from windows to save themselves. The Serbian paramilitary had threatened to burn them alive, to cut their throats, or to simply shoot them if they didn't leave their houses. They left without clothes, without shoes, parents in one direction and children in another. That was a difficult experience, to be with those people 97 days and nights. Among them, there were 7 invalids, 35 children under 10 years of age, who didn't even know where their parents were. There were people there of all ages and professions. Those days were my most beautiful spiritual experience. God was our salvation, and in some miraculous way He did save us.
On je bio u očima srpske vlasti.
The Serbs kept an eye on him. It's really lucky that he is alive today.
Jer on je mnogo smetao njima.
He was an annoyance to them
Albanski
because he didn't represent
narod
the Albanian people in the way that the regime wanted them to be seen, as a radical Islamic or Bin Laden type people. He did so much to represent Kosovo the way it really is.
predstavlja na originalnom stanju.
Today's Kosovo holds great potential. It is Europe's youngest populace, with half the population under 25 years old. Despite the economic crises and high levels of unemployment, Europe's newest state envisions a bright future. The Catholic Church is actively participating in the building of this better future.
Mi smo jedan stol.
We are one table, and on that table everything we have is offered, starting from our minds, our hearts and our love. And we invite everyone, come and see whatever pleases you. We'll never say to anyone, you have to be this or you have to be that. But the offer is there. The more varied the selection, the easier it is to find something that appeals to you. After all the communism and atheism that was imposed, people are delighted to find that we are now actually being offered these alternatives. And that's how it started, the so-called popularity, or more precisely, the presence and witnessing of our church.
Prisutnost, odnosno svedočenje naše crkve.
To give love without seeking anything in return. For Father Lush, this is the essential service of the Church in Kosovo today. The inspiration that both priests and laity can draw on this is the inexhaustible love exemplified through the life and person of Mother Teresa of Calcutta.
Majka Terezija za Albansku.
Mother Teresa means so much for our church and for us Catholic Albanians, and even to our brother Muslims. She has become such an example that no one can reject her. We are proud of her and grateful to God for her. She is the fruit of martyrdom. Through 2,000 years of history, 1,500 was spent in persecution and under so many burdens, beginning with the Roman Empire, and then the Turkish, and later the communists. God gave us hope, fruit and comfort in the person of Mother Teresa.
Father Lush emphasizes to what extent Mother Teresa affected his life choices, his deeds and his attitudes. He had the pleasure of making her acquaintance. Later, in the years that followed, he watched her closely on her journeys. Parts of this rich experience he has published in various books over the past 20 years.
My mother and grandmother, both now deceased, knew Mother Teresa from her childhood. In my home she was spoken about as if she were a legend. There's a nun from our parts who headed out for faraway India, and there she works wonders. I was really curious to see, hear, or know something of her.
He met her as a philosophy student in 1968. The palpable presence of God in her made such a profound impression on the young seminarian that it served as an ongoing source of inspiration in the way he would later live his priesthood.
Ja sam želio upravo biti ne kasap.
I wanted to be like a surgeon who would gently heal the wounds on the souls and bodies, not just on my own people, but all people. But I'd have to be careful not to make the wound bigger or add new, worse wounds, but that I would somehow heal them. If I have to cut somewhere, let it be a cut of love, or forgiveness, or awareness that something is not good and cannot go on, because life, justice, peace and love aren't Serbian nor Albanian, but belong to the whole world. They are God's works. I'm trying, despite all my limitations and weaknesses, to be like Mother Teresa, a ray of God's love.
Majka Terezija, zraka Božje ljubavi.